Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me and give me the opportunity to talk. I will be talking mostly on certain art phenomena, certain tendency, which appeared a couple of years ago and within which I'm very much involved in at the moment, what I call art and science movement. This is okay. In 2011, I began the project Art and Science Meeting in the Center for Contemporary Art in Gdańsk, where we decided to present a series of exhibitions of the artists, dealing with this issues in art, also to organize a series of conferences, international, national, local workshops, as well as we published a series of books dealing with robotic art, biotech art, nano art, and this kind of stuff. So the beginning of this project came with the realization that there are some new aspects in contemporary art. This art dealing with This is the key.
This one. No.
No, I was.
Button. The button.
Okay.
No. This one.
This is the wrong direction, but I don't care. Okay, good. Thank you, sorry. So actually what we can observe is sort of stagnation in new media art. The discussion, especially in the context of regularly, annually organized artistic events and competitions like the one that Ars Electronica leads, let us realize that actually there is some different approach within this area that we are observing sort of decrease in the interest in technology itself, that we are not very much interested in designing the interfaces, which was very characteristic for the interactive art in the 90s, in the last decade of the 20th century, that we are even not interested in designing the interferences between the viewer and technology. So not interaction is being designed nowadays, but just the experience. So the interfaces became invisible. We use our body or our physiological processes to deal with the artwork. So we are slowly coming from the interest in new media art to the activity in the context of media technological scientific culture. So finally, we are coming to this area I started to work in, that means relationship between art and science. So this is what we can call the new tendency in the contemporary art. There are a number of artists producing objects or processes, events dealing with production of knowledge. So producing of knowledge is replacing producing the objects, providing the audience with aesthetic experiences. And this is the challenge for the institutions nowadays, the challenge for museums, the challenge for art centers, trying to cope with this sort of challenge. Because we have to work in the new conceptual framework. These concepts, theories that were organized, that had been organizing this activity for for decades must be reworked, refurbished, renewed towards this new concept. We need the new facilities, new equipment for the artistic institutions. Actually, sometimes we have to build a laboratory. We have to provide the artists with bioreactors. We have to make the robots run within the gallery spaces. We need the new competences from the staff. Staff has to challenge new work and new necessity to make the exhibition working. And this is actually not the very new tendency in art. I mean that we have been facing with the process of organizing art towards the principles of getting knowledge about something else, but originally, for example, in the framework of conceptual art, it was just the internal interest. Art became the way of researching itself. So it was the first point. The second is when the artist became to analyze the cultural context. Firstly, the artistic institutions, so institutional critique was actually the first step behind the scope of artistic institutional world. Next, we have a sort of cultural studies perspective. So art was mostly engaged in challenging, fighting some political, social problems, not the aesthetic, not the artistic one. Art was becoming policy making more than creating aesthetical value. And finally, we have a scientific approach. So from certain perspective, this art and science tendency is the sort of finalization of this transformation of art lasting at least half a century. But from another perspective, this is the new approach, because in a way we are going beyond this artistic scope, which was organized around some ideas provided by Marcel Duchamp. I don't know if you noticed that for quite a while we could be sure that whatever we meet in the art world, we should somehow relate this to some ideas created by Duchamp in the very beginning of historical avant-garde. But together with art and science, we are coming to the new area when artists are less interested in artistic work by itself, but mostly with how to deal with new concepts of culture, new concepts of technology, new concepts of identity, all sort of created or initiated by digital new media technology. So we are still talking about digital, about new media technology, but in a different way. So we are talking about the art formerly known as media art or new media art. We are talking about post-media art, which doesn't mean that this is the art just losing interest or stopping using digital technology. This is just the situation when art goes beyond this horizon created by internal artistic issues, where technology is interested by itself, how we should create the interface, how this interface can operate, in which way it can engage the participant, the viewer becoming the participant. So we are actually going beyond this horizon of interest. We are talking about something new. We are talking about knowledge production. So there are two different but connected topics we have to deal with. One is What is the roles, functions, possible uses, and the new horizons provided by science to art? And from the other side, what is the role of art in the context of science? And I may say that after the series of discussions, conferences, I may say that these issues are understood, seen differently, depending on from which side we approach this. So mostly from the side of the scientists, usually we could hear that science is extremely important for art, but art can provide nothing to scientists. This is even opinion of Roger Malina, one of the great supporters of this dialogue between of art and science, chief editor of Leonardo, because for him this is still very important for art to discuss with the science, but science can deal without art well enough. So this is actually this sort of approach. From the side of artists, the view is different. Many of the artists believe, and they prove with what they do in art, that they really have something to say and provide to the science. And to talk about these different relationships, I propose to have a look at them on 3 different levels. So I call it 1, science for art's sake, the second, and the third, art for science sake, and this is quite easy to understand, art for social reality shaped by science. So the second form of relationships is very, very important for me, because on this level, artwork and the artists, they don't probably want to provide something we can call knowledge, but they stay in the context, typical characteristic approach for artwork, which means providing the viewers with the audience, with the experiences. But this is the new form of the experiences. This is the experience of the world, the new construction of world, the world being rebuilt by science. I think that synthetic biology provides the typical characteristic scenario for this approach. Synthetic biology, which is biology not really interested in researching what is life, but this is much more interested in producing life. So this is on this level where art becomes very, very important factor, sort of critical approach towards science. So on this level, artworks and artist activities become actually the way of analyzing the new vision of the world, the new scripts for the future, and discussing with the scientists what can be done to avoid certain not really needed consequences of scientific activities. If we talk about science for art's sake, so this is what is actually quite obvious, which means that artists make use of the equipment, apparatus, imagery, just producing by science. So there are several examples showing these new structures of artworks. This is Alan Zarecki performance given in Kiasma. So in this case, we don't have to do with something which is really new in the context of artwork. We are still facing this approach to provide formally organized artifacts or events, but however in this context, it looks differently because of different media, different materials being used. Art for social reality, as I said, this is art providing new form of experiences for the audiences, like in the case of Eduardo Katz, the artwork becomes the flower coming out of genetic engineering of DNA by Eduardo and plant Petunia. We can't say that this is the way of producing the knowledge, but we can say that this is the way of facing the audience with certain issues which makes them orientate not towards traditional artistic aesthetic values, but towards some scientific, some cognitive aspects of the artwork. The same with Monika Fleischmann and Wolfgang Strauss installations dealing with data flow. So the audience immerse the spaces organized on sort of crossroads of different data flows, and navigating in this area becomes the artistic experience. Louis-Philippe Demer and Gareth Stewart providing us with new forms of performances where aesthetical concepts, just organizing our interests towards the new vision of the hybrid or hybrids world. Similar is with George Regrady, who is proposing the new experience where web-free contexts become the way of producing experiences. And very, very characteristic for this approach, Paul Vanno's relative velocity increased device. We have to do with the piece which proposes us reflection on the relationship between different races, and this is the proposal to discuss with some scientific approaches to be found in this area. And finally, art for science, and this is this area when we talk about art producing knowledge, when we analyze carefully different proposals we can find in this area, we can find all different approaches, scientific approaches, basic research, applied art and science, applied research, and well, research and development approach. So what we know already from the area of research, we can find as projects realized by the artists. And Oron Katz and Jonat Zur project lasting several years already is a very good example of such an approach. We have to do with artists trying to develop the concepts of life, dialoguing not only with other artists, but mostly with scientists. What they organize, I mean, Symbiotica at university in Australia, in Perth, is sort of new studio, artist studio, which is actually laboratory. So nowadays, artists works in laboratory, not in the traditional studio, which is actually sort of obligation for artistic institutions who are to present such artworks. They also have to become the new space where exhibition space becomes laboratory space, when actually the visiting the museums becomes the participation in the workshop, in the form of art which has very little to do with traditional approach towards art, which makes the audience sort of participants of such processes. Another example, Patrick Tresset and his robots making drawings, making portraits. There are some some of them. And Diane Gromala, what she does is extremely important, because in the case of her art, we deal with the approach when the artworks using, for example, virtual reality worlds, trying to provide the tool helping people suffering to find sort of new medicine. So art becomes the tool to solve chronic pain, to help people deal with it. So this is something rather not not often found in the field of art. And what is important, the results of the artistic experience as sort of new medicine is proved by several research. So this is not the artist's expectations. This is the real output of the experiencing the artwork. And one more example, Guy Benary, the artist. I'm just working on the next year exhibition with his participations. This is the artist working with hybrids, with semi-living or living robotic installations where biological wet part of the piece communicate with robotic one, creating this sort of I'm just drawing your attention to the names and the organizations working for the production of such work, because this is the new form of artistic endeavors, where scientists, PhD students and artists work together to create the artworks. This is just the abstract for the paper published by the whole group in one of the scientific journal. And I'd like to draw your attention to the keywords, because this is very characteristic. This is an article about the artwork with such keywords. If we remove art, which is placed in the very, very end of this list, so we have to do with the real scientific approach. So there are several questions we have to ask when we deal with this sort of art, just being between a scientific museum or a science center and traditional museum of gallery. How those institutions should dialogue in order to create the new model of institution which could cope with this sort of challenges. Artists become researchers. Do they become scientists as well? And just to end, I'd like to propose you to think about a slightly different way to approach science and scientific approach, which is typical for the wiki world. That this is the way of producing knowledge with audience participation. We are in the world where the idea of do-it-yourself is being replaced by the idea doing with others. So communication between participants, artists, researchers, and the audience become the important factor also in this area, in the area of producing knowledge. There are just images of some books we prepared as the output of this series of events. We are just in the final moment of preparing the 3 new books, one on cyborg art and Stellark, another on Bill Vaughan and robotic art and culture, and the 3rd one is on Ken Feingold and artificial intelligence in the context of art. Thank you very much.